Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you for joining me. On the show this week, CJ Geibe joins me. CJ is another fellow Minnesotan that works at a local Christian Brothers repair shop. Recently, if you're in the Facebook group for the podcast, I had posted a 19 Jeep Wrangler that I was looking for a cam crank correlation on, chasing some misfires on this thing. And that in itself was difficult to find because the newer ones are a little bit different as far as the pattern goes. But based on what I was asking for and some of the symptoms that I had given, CJ was in the Facebook group, and he recognized that I was going down the same rabbit hole that he recently did on the same engine, different vehicle. And he called me and clued me into exactly what I needed to look for. And I did, and it was exactly what was wrong with mine was what was wrong with his. Now, you know, the actual failure, not that surprising, I guess, but the way it presented itself in symptoms, I thought was very interesting. That kind of sent us both down the wrong path until we found what was wrong. And once we found what was wrong, okay, now it makes sense. But again, very, very interesting the way the symptoms present themselves and easy to go in the wrong direction. But that's what we're going to talk about today. So I enjoyed this, both, getting to the resolution of the vehicle and getting to meet CJ. Hopefully you will as well. With that out of the way, let's jump in. All right, we are live. Or not live, recording. How's it going, CJ?
Good. How are you, Sean?
Good. Sorry to pull you away on such a beautiful day. Absolutely crazy. I looked at the thermometer outside. It said 80 degrees before I hopped in here.
Yeah, it's a welcome change for what we've had.
Oh my God. Yeah. After such a long, brutal winter, I think it was like third record snowfall, or the third highest snowfall on record in Minnesota. That's
incredible.
Yeah.
So I have a really long commute, and I've definitely felt it this year. How about you with the mobile stuff?
Dude, that is a major efficiency killer. You double your drive time everywhere. And
every location, I'm sure.
Yeah. And what are you going to do? We're driving around these little Ford Transit Connects too, which, I mean, we got a good record going. Like neither of us went in the ditch this winter. And nice. I mean, so for what they are, they work. You just got to be smart. Yeah. But no matter how good of a driver you are, it's going to slow you down like crazy.
Right.
And it seemed to snow like every single time we had a snowstorm, it was like a weeknight at 2 a.m.
Yes.
It couldn't snow on a Saturday.
It's like always the middle of the week this year. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's just crazy. So, yeah, today it is absolutely beautiful outside. All of the dog poop is revealed in my yard right now.
Yep.
I thought I was doing a good job, but I looked out there yesterday like, nope, I got some work to do.
Yeah, the early spring, everything's brown, literally.
Yeah, exactly. Cool, man. So you're over in Monticello, is that correct?
Yep, I live in Monticello and I work down in Savage. So yeah, I got a long commute.
Yeah. So, I mean, for anybody who's not familiar with the cities, I'm up north of the cities, about half hour. So would you say you're west?
Yep, northwest.
About the same?
Yep,
okay.
Up 94.
Okay, cool. So yeah, you reached out to me. I had recently posted, I was requesting a waveform in the Facebook group. I was working on a Jeep and looking for a cam crank correlation waveform. And I think I had listed some symptoms in there, or some things I was looking for. And you had reached out to me with some very helpful insight as to what was going on. I'm sure we can get into that and tell our adventures into the wonderful world of Jeeps. But what maybe we should start with, what's your background? How long you been doing this? Who do you work for?
Absolutely. So I'm actually the lead technician at Savage Christian Brothers.
Okay.
Prior to this, I was lead technician at the Lakeville Christian Brothers. Their Christian Brothers is franchise shops, and they're nationwide. The two, Savage and Lakeville, are owned by the same owner.
Okay.
So when we recently opened the Savage shop, December is when we opened this one. And when we opened this one, I came over here to get it up and rolling and make sure everything was on the up and up. So prior to that, been turning wrenches for over 25 years. Started literally at 15, hanging tires and stuff. And that, I think all of us pretty much did,
Sure.
Then I split off after high school. I went to a race engine building school down in Houston. After that, I came home, and I think it's a little bit easier to support a family on the wages that you can make in general auto repair. There's definitely a niche market for performance engine building. It's a lot harder to get into and not quite as family friendly. So
okay,
I swung back around into the general auto repair and been here since. So
is that one of those things where there's only so many lucrative positions available?
Yeah, and what I found was everybody wants to do it, and when everyone wants to do it, the pay is drastically lower because people are willing to do.
Sure. I love doing it. I'll do it for cheap just because I love it, sort of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. People are passionate about it, as am I. I'm still into making things go fast and that kind of stuff. But it's much easier to support a family, and in my opinion, a lot more of a stable career field in the general auto repair. And even moving forward from where we're at now, I don't think 10 years ago, if you'd have told me our industry would be where it's at as far as demand for quality technicians goes, I never would have guessed it would be as strong of a demand as it is, and it's only going to get worse as far as that goes, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, they're not getting any easier to work on, and it's not like we are getting bum rushed with applicants into our field. There was a steady flow at the college, but not enough, bodies to fill all the positions that shops were looking for. And it's, still that case today. So yeah, if you got a good skill set and attitude and work ethic, boy, you're going to be sought after and have lots of opportunities and options as a technician right now. So that's what I told all the kids at the college. I'm like, hey, you're in a great spot right now. May not be great for the industry, but it is good for you right now.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, especially when you see a younger guy or gal with mechanical aptitude and work ethic, man, it's really, every time, we get like a general service or apprentice with those two traits that show through, I really tend to pull them aside and say, hey, like, the world's kind of your oyster in this industry. Just stick with it, and you got to grind. And I'll say two other things. One, thank you, Sean, so much for the podcast and what you do. This is a huge thing for our industry, putting stuff like this out there and taking your time to do that. It's really a big deal. Secondly, I say to anyone listening to this, you're on the right track just by listening to stuff like this, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like there's so many other people out there doing some really cool stuff. And I remember when I was first exposed to that, I was just like, oh, wow, it's not all crabby people who are complaining about their job. That's not all this industry is. And it's a decent portion, and depending on where you're at, maybe that's all you've seen. But there's some outstanding people in this industry. If you kind of expand out from, hey, if you're in a good shop with good people, that's fantastic. But Absolutely. From my personal experience, that's the minority. Yep. And if you're in that, we're just like, wow, this sucks and everybody else sucks. Take a look around outside, network out. And those are some of the people out there, like, Scanner Danner is the one that's always brought up, but that's a great example of like, you watch his stuff and you can really inspire you to, okay, there's some cool people and there's some cool stuff I can do too, right? Everybody has something special that they can offer, and go do it. Why not? Nothing's stopping you. So
for me, it was a lot of years ago, but the first Thornton class I swung in through, I was like, whoa.
Yeah, right. This is different. This is different than my Napa training that I've been going to for sure. Yep. It's cool. We're not doctors, we're not lawyers, but man, there are some crazy smart people in this field. I was actually just thinking about that today. Again, some of the people that I know in this field, I'm like, wow, we don't have a 8-year degree to get to where we're at. So the really impressive people, the people that impress me, it's like, yes, they've done a lot of training, but they don't have like an official college degree. And I guess that doesn't necessarily mean anything, but that they figured all this out. And just the level of intelligence too, right? You don't have to be a doctor or a lawyer to be a crazy smart person, but a guy like Thornton, and I could go on and on with the list.
It's a long list.
Yeah. It's cool. It's cool. And I want to try to be exposed to as many of those people as I can be. They say you should be the dumbest person in the room and it's good for you. And it's easy for me to accomplish, but I try to seek out as many smart guys and gals out there as I can. So
that's awesome.
So let's see, how should we start this off? Do you want me to fill everybody in on my Jeep first? Do you want to start with yours? How do you want to tackle this?
Sure. Why don't we start with yours and then I can swing through mine and we'll meet in the middle at the end, maybe.
Okay. All right. So, this is a shop I do programming and diagnostic work for, and a pretty sharp lead technician there. Nice. He knows his stuff and he's been doing it for a long time. So if they're calling me on a diag, I know that it's going to be somewhat challenging. It's not going to be really simple. And this one was kind of weird because when I got to the diagnosis part, I was like, well, this is really straightforward. Originally I got called out for a PCM. Okay. The guy had been through it and they made the call PCM, and they didn't say anything about drivability issues at this point. They just said, hey, it's I should fill in everybody on the vehicle. It's a 19 Wrangler with a 3.6 liter, the dual overhead cam and some added stuff from the old 3.6s that we'll talk about. But they called me out to do a PCM in it, brand new from the dealer. Okay, come out, do it, programmed, leave. That's it. That's all they wanted me to do. Calls me back. It's like a week and a half later or so. And at this point, they're saying that there's misfires going on with this thing. That's what they were trying to correct with the PCM. And he's telling me about fuel trims and misfires that don't make sense. And it was cutting the injector pulse, which I think was intentional by the computer, but he wanted me to come in and look at it. Okay, let's figure out these misfires. Okay. So I come back for the diagnosis and I verify, yep, it's missing. You fire it up, and it seemed to get worse the longer it ran. But at idle, it was a noticeable miss, and all on one bank of the engine, right? So you got 135 on one side on the passenger side, and you got 246 on the driver's side of the vehicle, and it's a conventionally mounted engine. Okay, cool, misfires. And So the first thing I do on something like that, especially when they're all in one bank, is I check for timing codes because I was like, well, maybe the timing's out, but I figured this guy would have caught that, and there weren't timing codes, and so I look at the VVT data. Right, you can see desired and actual cam values. It's right on the money. Like there's no variation between desired and actual or between the banks. They all look good. Okay, well, let me do a relative compression test. Like, let's verify mechanical engine state with what we're seeing on the scan tool there. So I do that, and I've already put this up in the group. Maybe I'll attach it to this episode once I put it live. But it's about as clear as day to me that this has a major mechanical issue. And I'll do my best to describe this with audio, but a relative compression is going to have a series of peaks, each one representing how hard the starter is pushing on each piston, right? And so you should have, 6 pushes of the starter against the compression strokes for each cylinder, and then it repeats itself as long as you crank it, right? And crises are easy. You hold the accelerator to the floor, clear flood. It kills fuel and spark if you clear flood it like that, but easy. So I have that test done in a few minutes, and I look at it, and one peak goes high. The next peak is like maybe half of the first one, and then it goes high again, and then half of the next one goes high, half of the next one. Okay, so I got 3 cylinders that are lower compression than the other 3. Now, are they on the same bank? The firing order, and I did have to get spark involved to sync up, but it is 2, 4, and 6. So the low peaks, the small peaks, the ones that are half the amplitude of the high ones are 2, 4, and 6. It's the cylinders we have misfires on. And once I saw that, I could hear it too. It wasn't like as clear as day audibly like a dead hole would be, but once I was listening for it, you could hear the pitch change every other cylinder. And I was like, oh yeah, this is simple. And I was telling the technician about it, and he's not arguing with me, but just very skeptical. And I'm like, dude, this test doesn't lie. This is it. Here's your 3 low cylinders. Here's your 3 high cylinders. It's on 2, 4, and 6. I was like, I don't think the timing's off, but something is wrong with that bank. And this is the side where the plenum goes over it. So I couldn't pull a plug. I couldn't do in cylinder. And so I left it up to them. I was like, I can't do much more without disassembly at this part. I'll charge you guys for my time so far. And you know what direction you're headed. Take it apart and figure out what's wrong with it. Yep. Right. And so they did. They took it apart. He checked all the timing. Timing was on. Checked everything that he could check, that he could, and said it was on. He actually called me and said the compression's fine. And maybe we'll get into the numbers here eventually. But this is where I came back to it the second time, because he has it all apart. Or I should say he has the intake off. He has the plenum off, and so they checked everything. Timing's on, this and that. And so now I'm back in it, and he wants me to figure out why these 3 cylinders have low compression. And this is where I wanted a known good, a cam crank value for this engine to, I know what I saw on the scan tool, but I want to see it live. I want to see it live. Yep. I want to see what are the values outputted and compare them to known good, just so I can completely rule out timing. I had also done an in-cylinder pressure test at this point because he had the intake off. Right. And I did it on both sides. So I did it on cylinder 1 and I did cylinder 2. My numbers, cylinder 1 was 190 compression, and that was actually all 3 on that side. And then bank 2 was 140, and it was even on all 3 cylinders on the driver's side on bank 2. So 140 versus 190. So my compression numbers again reflect a bad or low compression mechanical issue with the driver's side of the vehicle, the driver's bank. And the one thing I didn't know is, like, I don't know what good compression is,
right.
but hey, 190 seems good, and it's better than 140.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
So, hey, we got a problem with bank 2. I really need to rule out the timing before I go further. And that's kind of where I was with this when I had put it up on the Facebook group, because I didn't want to move any further until I was 100% sure on timing. So I guess that's kind of where you come in the picture here.
Sounds good. Yeah, ours was a 2019 Ram. This one was a little bit goofy. It had the hybrid system on it too. It's like a unit that bolts to the front of the motor. Looks like it bolts to the front of the water pump. Very bizarre. Never seen it before. So that I call that extra noise. It's something that you think about, but you're not sure if it has anything to do with life at all.
Sure,
so it's like, we got some noise on this one. Customer came in, check engine light on. No, I don't think they had any notable drivability concerns other than the check engine light was on. So I pulled codes. It had random misfire codes, and a lean bank 1 code. That was what it had when it first got to us. I started poking around. Noticed that my misfires were primarily at idle, primarily on bank 2, which is the left bank on this one. 2, 4, and 6 are on the left side, driver's side of the motor. Very, very light poking around. We didn't have a whole lot of diagnostic time leading into this. So we did a full vehicle inspection on it. We noticed that there was some module updates. We have YTech, so did some saw that it had some module updates available. The customer had to take the vehicle and was going to bring it back. So we actually had this thing 3 times before we ended up tearing into it. Second time we had it, they brought it back specifically for the module updates. Just let's get those updates. One of them was for the PCM, so I said, let's just run through the rail, get every module updated, clear all the codes, and see what happens. And it was misfiring before it left, so I called them, notified them, hey, we're gonna have to dive into this thing and get some diagnostic time. Again, he needed the truck, so he brought it back. I think it was the next Monday. And that's where I told him you need to leave it with me. And, we get to a certain point with some of these where if it's, deep in the rhubarb, we'll use it as kind of training. So it's we're not going to charge you the full boat on diagnostic, but we're going to need time with this. And if it's something I can utilize to show the other guys or, that kind of stuff, we will, and so we got some extra time on this one. And I started out with kind of the basic stuff. The 3.6 Nor Pentastar is a non-mass airflow car. So misfires on 1 bank. Start with the easy stuff and work your way backwards. Are the O2 sensors functioning? My shortcomings in this industry, I've some scope background, lab scope testing background, but not a whole lot. And I just have an older Snap-on. So, that's, if I had any advice for young techs up and coming, it'd be, spend the money on, pick your name brand scope and learn it, use it, know it. It can shave a lot of time off your diagnostic. So, this thing responded well to, lean conditions, rich conditions. Both O2 sensors seem to be functioning fine. I had no cam timing code similar to yours. With the YTech, I believe there's I can't remember the name of the test, but I could sweep the variable cam on both banks, and they both seem to, sweep both directions, or the directions that it would allow you to sweep intake and exhaust. Sure. Everything seemed like it was moving freely. The desired versus actual was matching, those types of things. I actually tested for E185 just for argument's sake.
Sure.
Just, in case we had something weird going on. I know it was 1 bank, but I just did it as one more test to throw on there that,
I've had contaminated fuel have a 1-cylinder misfire. Like
That's
sometimes
crazy.
stuff doesn't make sense, man.
Yep.
I guess you got to check for that stuff. Yeah.
The one that threw me off the most was the lady who put 2 gallons of diesel fuel in her Lexus. That'll throw you for a loop.
So she had the rest of the tank full of gas.
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
It took a while to figure that one out. I'm like, why can't I light this gas on fire?
Yeah, she burns a little different. Yeah. Oh man.
The other thing that I noticed with this thing that really jumped off the page at me, you talked a little bit about field trims with yours. I had on bank 1, which again is the passenger side bank, I had positive 19 long terms and negative 5%, which is, if you do the combined total of those two is positive 14%. Passenger side combined total was negative 6%. So we definitely had a skew in fuel trims, not agreeing with each other. I actually pulled the O2 sensors out on this thing. I was going to see if I could swap them bank to bank, but they have different length pigtails, so that didn't work. Well, I had those out. I did a quick back pressure test, even though mine primarily was at idle. I drove this thing, and I thought it drove really well off of idle. Like, go drive it around. You would not know this thing had a misfire other than sitting in the parking lot. And even then, very similar to yours, like when you said you had to really, once you saw it on the relative compression, then you could kind of hear it. Very similar to this one. Like, it wasn't a dead miss or anything like that. There was a significant amount of smoothness to the engine, really, other than, not perfect, and it was picking it up on the scanner and that kind of thing. So, you'd think like a plug cat or something would be more higher RPM, higher load.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of same lines of thought there as when I measured the compression, I used the WPS, so like in-cylinder pressure transducer, because I wanted to see what did I have excessive back pressure. Now, I was doing this cranking, so I wasn't sure whether I was going to see anything or not, but like there wasn't any. So I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe a clogged cat on one side or another. For sure. But this gets into like the in-cylinder pressure waveform theory, and I'm sure there's people out there that know, more of the details than me. When you're doing a cranking compression test, I don't think a plug cat would necessarily affect the numbers. Sure. Is it going to stop the engine from breathing air and fuel through the way it's supposed to? Yeah, definitely. But just compressing gas for a measurement, I don't know that it would really affect the numbers, like the peak compression too much, where I did see 140, 190. Right. And the other thing I was thinking, because I knew the older 3.6s, but I was like, well, maybe this one's different in the way they set it up. Where's the tone wheel in relationship to the camshaft, right? Oh, sure. And so I'm sure you've seen some vehicles where the tone wheel or the actual camshaft could shift, but the tone wheel stays fixed to its location. So the computer is none the wiser, and our cam crank waveforms are right on the money when the physical camshaft itself, maybe a pin shears or something, but not possible on this one because the tone wheels are on the back of the cam. Now I've seen the tone wheel shift, but that's a code thing. Yeah. That's not a drivability low compression. Correct. So there's no way for that camshaft to physically move without the computer having the ability to see it. And that was something I came to the conclusion of on this vehicle. I'm like, yeah, if it's out of time, it should be showing you that either with data or with codes. For sure. So I did a tiny bit of digging at this point, and we touched base with the customer, got approval to pull the plenum off. A lot of guys probably think 3.6 big deal, yank the plenum. These newer 3.6s have an EGR system on them, an EGR cooler and an EGR valve on them. And it adds on the trucks. I'm sure on that Jeep, it was the same way. It's a lot of more stuff to take off. So it's not a quick, caravan yank the plenum, for an oil cooler or whatever. So we got approval to pull the plenum. At that point, I'd read some stuff online about valve seat issues, cylinder head issues on these. So I thought, it'd be highly unlikely to have
one whole side of the engine with, like crack valve seats or something like that. But it's somewhere to go. I did do a compression test. We were talking about this. I did do a compression test, but I cannot find the numbers anywhere, and I can't remember even what I got. But what I did do, the other thing, once I had the plenum off, is I did a cylinder leak down test on all 6 cylinders, and they were like the best numbers I've ever seen.
It's funny you say that. So the technician working on it did a leak down test because he had one, and it was the same thing. He's like, they were like 5%.
Yep.
I thought my tester was broken.
Same. Yep. That's exactly what I got. And I went up front, talked to the guys up front, and I'm like, hey, like, I've actually done quite a few engines of cylinder leak down, and I don't know if I've ever seen one across the board as good as it's very discerning.
That's what I would tell when I would tell my students with the leak down test. I'm like, if all the numbers are too good to be true, like double check your test method, you might be doing something wrong. So it's kind of the same thing, but that's what it was on that thing. It was sealed up tight.
Yeah. These things are, hindsight, pretty impressive engines from a technology standpoint. At this point, I paused after I saw the leak down test. I was like, okay, I need to research more about this engine. I need to figure out what I'm missing here. And this swings back around to my machinist background. I still belong to a couple of the communities there, and I get, like webinars, just like we get in our industry. They'll do Zooms or, webinar training events and stuff. And it went off like a light bulb. We're like, oh man, I had an email like 6 months ago for a webinar on these engines, on the Pentastars. And I found it, and lucky for me, I clicked the link back then, because then it allowed me access back into it. So I went home, I paused, I went home and I watched a 2-hour webinar on the Pentastar, and I'm like, there's something I'm missing here. In that webinar, I found a few things out. One of them being this newer Pentastar has a variable valve lift system, somewhat similar to Honda's VTEC. Somewhat similar. It actually runs 4 solenoids that operate this. There's a solenoid in the front of the cylinder heads, like the belt side of the cylinder heads. Those both run 1 valve each. One runs the cylinder one cylinder worth of valves. So one runs cylinder 1 intake valve. And then there's a second solenoid on the back, or 2 more solenoids on the back of the motor that control the other 2 valves.
Really?
What my initial thought when they talked about this, I was like, well, there goes the idea of a solenoid sticking or something, because it would only
it
would have to be 2 solenoids, or 3 of the valves worth of cylinders. The variable valve lift system's only on the intake cams on these. And then they went deeper into the engine. They kind of start with an assembled engine, talk about its background, then they work their way inward and disassemble it and kind of, talk about it. Another thing that they talked about is the oil passage that feeds this. So this system it takes oil pressure to engage the low lift, which would be your idle system. And it takes approximately 20 psi oil pressure to keep the lock pins in the state at which they would hold that low lift cam profile.
Okay.
And that decreases lift and duration for that idle camshaft. And in this video, they talked about there's a plug in the timing chain side of the cylinder head that has been known to come loose. And I'm like, okay, that would do it, because you could possibly drop oil pressure on one side of the motor. That would be bank to bank. And that's actually what drew me to pull the valve covers off of the one that we had, the Ram, thinking that maybe one of these plugs was backed off.
Okay.
So I got approval to pull the valve covers off at that point. I got the driver's side one off, because that's similar to yours. I think I skipped this earlier. Mine was identical to yours. I had misfires on 2, 4, and 6, which is the driver's side bank on this. And so I start with that side of the motor. I pulled the valve cover off and I was like deflated balloon when everything on that side of the motor was perfect. It's like, no, that's not what I wanted to see. And I was already that far in. So I decided to pull the passenger side valve cover off, just see if there's anything, broken valve spring, anything that I could see. And again, I fine-tooth combed the driver's side before I pulled the passenger side. I pulled the passenger side valve cover off, and what I found in there was the low lift cam lobes. Do you want me to get into this yet, or are we good? Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
So the low lift cam lobes on the opposing bank, so bank 1, no misfires on this bank, the low lift cam lobes on that bank were worn down. And what was happening was there was no noise with this engine. The reason being is there's 2 rollers on the outside of the cam follower, and those were able to roll against the high lift cam lobe. So this thing was effectively running on the high lift cam lobe, thinking that it was on the low lift cam lobe. And that's the failure point. So when you get into the idea of what is an engine, it's an air pump, intake, compression, power, and exhaust. The things that change, we effectively made bank 1, in my opinion, this is my take on it. We effectively made bank 1 a stronger pumping engine, at that point. And the PCM, I don't know the down and dirty of the strategy of the PCM, but I would tend to believe it's picking up the slowing down of the crankshaft on bank 2 as a misfire, when in reality, and I definitely want to get your take on what you think about this, but in reality, bank 2 is right. Bank 2 is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah. I'll let you take over at that point.
So I don't know for sure. I think there's probably something to that, right? The speed of the crank is definitely going to change between the two. If for no other reason that bank 1 has to squeeze harder on each compression stroke than bank 2.
Yeah.
The other part of this, and I don't know how much it is one or the other, it's a speed density system, right? And we're changing airflow through the engine. Something different is happening because we've changed the cam profile on one side of the engine, which changes the manifold pressure, right? And on a speed density engine, the manifold pressure is a major player in fuel delivery, but it's just one input for the whole engine. Right. And so I did not, by the time I talked to you and we took it apart, I didn't look at any of these values of what was manifold pressure exactly while it was running. But one of the suspicions I had about the misfires, particularly on bank 2, was potentially that this engine was overfueling, but only overfueling for the air actually moving through bank 2.
Oh, sure.
Right. So if you think about it, there's going to be more air moving through bank 1 because of the cam profile setup. And so, again, changing manifold pressure, computer reacts to it, ups the injector pulse because of the change in manifold pressure, adds the fuel across the board, ups the injector pulse. And that's right for the physical air moving through bank 1, but it is not right for the air moving through bank 2 and then potentially causes a misfire. I think there might be some of that, but like you say, it could be that just the difference in crank speed, because if you look at that relative compression, like I was saying, like there is a major difference. Yeah. I mean, it's 50 PSI of compression is what I measured. So could be a combination of both. But yeah, the way it presented itself, like you say, bank 1's now a more efficient engine compared to the other side, but they've got to share that manifold. They got to share the inputs from the computer, and it obviously didn't work out. But how wild to have the opposite side of the engine cause misfires on the other, and mechanically it seems like it's in good shape, right? 190 again. I'd love to test another one and know what's good. Is 140 good? 140 seemed low to me, and I have a theory about that too. But 190 seemed great, and then okay, well, 140 is a lot less. That's got to be where my issue is. One of the things I was thinking, and I'll put this up on the Facebook group, when I've taken some classes with people about relative compression, and I don't know how familiar you are with the test, but you're looking at amperage going, up and down. And once you get into a steady cranking state, right, you're just you look at the waveform, and one of the checks you can do for a gas engine is to measure the overall amplitude from peak to valley of the relative compression. And that's it's not a perfect science, but it's like a gauge to say, is this right? And I think off the top of my head, it's somewhere, I want to say 50 to 60. I could be off on that. I want to say that's the number that you're shooting for, is like 50 to 60 amps from peak to valley. I'll double check that number to see if I'm right. I have it in my notes somewhere, but the one that I measured, the high peaks were almost 100 amps from peak to valley. And again, the cylinder 2 was about half of that, roughly 50. So it's like, too much compression on the one side, but you would never think that if you've got misfires on one side of the bank and lower compression numbers. You're like, okay, well, that's my problem.
PCM's happy with this side.
Very interesting. Yeah. And if you're not familiar, like if you're used to working on 3.6s, they didn't have this valve lift system before. I didn't know how it worked. You just told me, I did not know there was 3 separate solenoids. I only saw the one up in front, and I didn't look into it much further than that. So all 3 would have to be stuck.
There's actually 4 solenoids, two for each bank. So so the one on the rear of the cylinder head, say on bank 1, controls the back tube intake. And then the front one controls.
So one solenoid for 2 cylinders.
Yep. I have no idea why they did it that way, but So fascinating system.
Now, and so the cam lobe, the low profile wore out, which again, I'll put a picture up so people can get a visual, but that caused the high lift cams. That was all the time. So it's like you're in VTEC mode all the time, but on one side of the engine only. And exact same thing for me. Maybe I didn't specify that, but you told me that. I had him take the valve cover off of the other side, and it was exactly what you told me, like worn down to the point where the low profile is no longer making contact with that rocker arm, which is trapped underneath it. Now, I saw one of the new rockers. The middle portion doesn't even have a bearing or a roller on it.
Yeah, it's like an old flat tappet.
What did they think was
I
going to
wonder
happen?
why they break. So in that video, in that training video, and this is from their numbers. I don't know anything beyond what they said about this, but they had the 4 camshaft part numbers. So, bank 1 intake and exhaust, bank 2 intake and exhaust. So they had those 4 part numbers, and they said Chrysler is currently selling just under 100,000 of these 4 part numbers combined a week.
Okay.
So we're going to see these.
We're not the only ones that are going to see this. Yeah.
And they do run, from a technician standpoint, the old 3.6 timing chain tensioner holders that you'd like, the weird bar shape thing that you cram down there. They run a different one. It's a different part number. We have the 2 of the kits for the older engine, and neither of them would work. So we ended up having to source the newer style one. They also have a cam holder, but I was able to do it without the cam holder. So
okay. You know what? I'm thinking back here. I forgot to make my point on the relative compression. When I was saying why it was 140, is that low for that engine? And I think it might be. So when I was talking about the amplitude and it was too much compression, right? So I almost feel like bank one, when it's coming up on that compression stroke, because it's more than normal, it's actually slowing the engine or the starter down a little bit so that next cylinder now is moving at a slower pace and builds less compression than it normally
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I should have done, now that I'm saying that out loud, is I should have pulled all of the plugs when I was doing a compression test, but I did not. I just pulled the ones I was testing, which if I would have pulled all three from the
other bank, that would give you
the other side, it may have upped my compression number on 2. So it's like these things you think of, you want to try next time.
It's like, give me another broken one quick. Well, it's fresh in my...
Yeah.
Well, and I looked after I talked to you, and I think spec on compression, I can't remember, I think it's like minimum of 100 PSI and no more than 10%. It's like, come on. Like, give me an actual number here.
I'd be very curious to know why so many manufacturers went that route. Maybe it was like to not replace engines when they didn't have
must
to.
Be avoiding warranty claims or something.
Yeah, because that became so popular, like in the 2000s. And it's across the board. Like that's all you get. Yeah, it needs at least 100. Well, no shit. Like it's like that's not how a combustion engine works.
My lawnmower will bump 100. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. So I've tried to keep records of my own stuff, but it's minimal. I don't have everything. So sometimes you're in like this, you're just in the dark, like what's good. Right. That can be said for a lot of tests, and especially if you get into the scope world. What's good?
Yeah, known goods are worth their weight in gold.
Yeah. But yeah, it's just a very interesting problem. But I really appreciate your help with it because I don't know how much longer I would have been in that rabbit hole before I pulled the passenger side and realized that was causing my issue.
I'd be willing to bet you were right around the corner from it. You know, you were looking for a known good cam and crank, and once you had found that, you would have, I think that would have been your next step with it. I mean, these are the ones, you know, and just like if I've messed with relative compression a little bit, I think I've done probably 5 or 6 of those tests. And that's another one where had I seen relative compression, I probably would have headed that way a little bit faster. I tested a few things, again, just to dot my I's and cross my T's more than anything, especially if I'm trying to use it as a training tool for some of the younger guys around here where I don't want to overlook something and then look like an idiot later.
Sure. Yeah. So they have you doing some actual training there with the technicians?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, we're moving a little more in that direction. I'm actually shifting more toward the upfront, more of a management type of role. So we're still in the transition phase. This location's new. Like I said, we opened in December, and we're doing really well. However, the snowstorms and ice storms that we had were strategically placed in a way to slow us down. So we're playing a little bit of catch up with that now. And once we get to where we need to be, then I'll make more of a transition toward the front and dive in more. And if a technician gets hung up on one or something like that, I enjoy the difficult ones. I like, being able to, keep your head on straight and just go into it knowing that there is a solution and there is something not right about it and we just need to find it, so.
Yep, exactly. You guys do all your own programming in Christian Brothers, right?
So we have, it's pretty nice having the equipment. It's definitely been, really nice to be exposed to it. Prior to this, I have a little bit of GM background, and then at another independent shop, we had a few of the OE's tools. But here we have IDS GM, I guess it's, what do they call it, Tech Authority now, or
TLC
yep.
for GM.
And then we have Honda, HDS, Techstream, Toyota. What else do we have?
How do they run it? Is there like one person they say, hey, you're going to do programming? Is it a free for all? Anybody can grab one? How do they do that?
So it's a little bit of a free for all, but we have a lot of in-house training. Christian Brothers Home Office, not to throw a plug in for them, but they've done a really good job with the in-house website that they put together with a lot of training modules. Ones that they built, simple stuff like, how to fire this tool up. A lot of guys, are used to like a Snap-on or something like that and come into this type of environment and they're like, it's great. We have all these OEs, but so they have kind of crash courses through them. And then they also have, normally one guy at each location who's pretty proficient at them. And they have some, training down in Houston that we do. That's where they're based out of, is Houston. So, a lot of the master techs or lead techs at each location have been down there for some in-person training, and become significantly more proficient with them then. At least enough to be dangerous, I say. So,
yeah, right. You can do some things with the factory tool you maybe want to think twice about.
Don't hit that button. Don't hit that button. So, I had. It was funny actually. On this RAM, I was programming it when I was doing those module updates, and it froze. And it was we tend to have a rule: no programming half an hour before close. Like you give yourself some time.
That's a good rule.
And this thing froze on me. And Christian Brothers has at home office, they have some technical support guys that are, on the higher end of the spectrum from a diagnostic standpoint, but also from these OE tools. They're way more versed in them. And I called and caught the one guy, and I thought, I'm like, I'm not, obviously don't turn the key off, don't, but I'm like, I got a laptop that ain't moving and I don't know what to do. So we got the power supply hooked up to it, and, to the laptop itself. I already had the, power supply hooked up to the vehicle, which is, just best practices stuff. But, and, he's like, well, let's just hang out for a while and see what happens. So, and all of a sudden just went, and we're like, okay, well, the clouds parted, I guess we're good to go. But definitely gave me a heart attack. It was when I was updating the cluster, and I'm like, dude, I don't want this guy to have a misfire and a dead cluster. That's definitely not. So it was a unique situation, but we got through it. But yeah, it's from that standpoint, it's nice to have, a little bit of tech support, from guys like that. And they've kind of, they've put a lot of work into it. I've been with Christian Brothers for almost 5 years now, and they've put a lot of work into, advancing it from a standpoint. Like we have like known good repairs. They pour into like a little bit of a database, and there's a bunch of new stuff coming out that hasn't hit us yet. And when we request support, there's a little form we fill out, and they can log into the work order remotely, and they can log in. We have they call it an Arctic, but it's like I think it's a Dell brand, like a touchscreen tablet type of thing, that all the systems are on. And I still don't know how it works because they're not partitioned. So it's a little bit beyond me as far as that goes. Because we had Durabooks before with partitioned hard drives, but now we have Chrysler, Ford, GM, Toyota, all that stuff on one screen. So I don't know how. Right. Yeah, it's a science beyond me. That's above my pay grade, I guess. But sure. It's nice to have that ability to reach out to them. And
yeah, well, for me doing it, if I want to program something to see if it will fix my problem, that's not a big deal. Okay, I'll just update it. And hey, does that can I rule out programming for this vehicle now? Yeah, but for your average shop, that's kind of it's a pain and a commitment and time just to see like, okay, well, this TSB says something about a code that I have. I don't know if it covers this issue, but I kind of have to do this before I move on. Okay, let's set up an appointment, this and that. So yeah, having that in house, that's got to be handy in those situations.
Yeah, there's it's a love and a hate. I mean, and you as a mobile guy know like the updating and the keeping everything up to date. That can be
yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, we tend to lay that on the lead tech at each location, or at least up here we do, and you're going through and making sure everything functions. So when someone grabs it, they need it in the moment. It's available and functioning.
Yeah,
you're not 4 updates behind on IDS or something, you know. So
you have to update the program.
You know, it's like no. So it's always on a Friday at 5:00. You know. So
yeah, exactly. Why not? I've tried to get better about that. Like, what's the last job of the day going to be? Let me think about this. It's probably not going to be that BMW electrical diagnosis.
Intermittent, no start on a mobile.
Yeah. But you never know when something that's going to throw a curveball at you anyways, no matter how well you plan, ends up being that job on Friday afternoon, or the reason I was 20 minutes late today. You know, it's just that's the way it goes. I gotta do some research. I got an Acura MDX with it's pretty funny actually. The guy replaced the module. He doesn't know what the module is. I was like,
oh, okay.
So questions arise. You know, why are you replacing it then? And I won't get into that, but I get there and it's new from Honda. Or Honda Acura or whatever. There's a part number on it, which it keeps coming up with a traction control module, but I really don't think this is a traction control module. The guy at Honda that he bought it from, now I wasn't at parts. I haven't called parts yet. This is my last job of the day, so I'm going to call tomorrow. He couldn't tell the guy what the module was because the guy just gave him the part number off the old one. Okay, and it's just a little black box like this under the dash. And if you unplug it, like half the car goes dead. So I'm like, this is not anything with traction control or ABS that the part number comes up with. And then I plug in the new one and you can't communicate with it. So there's like no programming possibility. You can't communicate with most of the car, I should say, with the new one plugged in. So I'm like, what in the heck is going on here? So that's where I left the day. I have no idea what this module is or what it does, or the reason the guy's replacing this because his fog light stays on. And so I don't even know if it's going to fix his problem.
Oh man.
So yeah, that was the last job of the day for me. And I'm just like, dude, I'm going to have to do some reading and I will call you back because I got a podcast to do.
That is so funny. Yeah, that's a unique one. There's man, it's interesting. Like we opened this new shop and we've had, I swear in the last, 3, almost 4 months, I've had some of the weirdest out in left field diagnostic stuff that, like this one, like there's no tick to it. There's nothing, and it's a wiped out cam. And it's like, okay. I had another one before this that pressure transducer would have helped me a lot on that one. But that one was a car that the customer, it was a Fusion, turbo 4-cylinder Fusion, and the customer complaint was lack of power. Well, it got to us. She drove it here, but we couldn't even start it to get it in the bay. So I don't know how that happened. But long story short, it acted just like plug cat, like to the point where it wouldn't start. But back pressure test, zero back pressure. I'm talking like zero back pressure. At the end of the rainbow is a broken turbo, and the exhaust wheel is jammed into the turbo so hard that it's plugged the exhaust flow. So it did have plugged exhaust just upstream from where I was testing. I was like, oh, you need a turbocharger. The WPS is the answer there. I just remembered something else I was going to mention about the Jeep. Going back to that, it just came to me when you were talking about WPS and stuff. So the technician who was working on this car actually informed me of this once I showed him what was going on, and it all made sense to him too.
he had observed, and he didn't even say anything, say this to me. And when I was getting into it, and not that it really would have clued me in, but it makes sense after hindsight. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Not every time, but occasionally when he would stop the engine, right? He would shut off the engine after it was running. He would hear it go out of the intake. And he noticed it. He thought it was odd because, again, sharp guy, he's been doing this for a while. He's like, that just doesn't sound normal for an engine shutting off. It would just go out the airbox, and he could hear it when the engine would shut off. Not every time, but it would do it. And he just like didn't really pursue it much. He just thought it was odd. But then once he saw the cams, he's like, well, that makes sense if the valve lift is going to be different, right? If we're hanging that intake valve open longer than we normally would be, or opening it at a different time or whatever, and that engine comes to a stop, we're pushing some air potentially back up through the intake at a certain point. So I thought that was an interesting thing. So if I get another one, I'm going to listen for that and see if that's a giveaway.
Yeah, this is one of the ones, again, and this is to anyone, listening to this with this lab scope stuff, that's on the tail end of my career as far as turning wrenches and maybe even diagnostic. I don't know where the future leads for me, but man, get into scope testing. I mean, there's becoming proficient with a scope. It would do wonders for diagnostic, and it strips down, in my opinion, the year, make, and model of a vehicle. It brings it down to everything's an air pump. When you're talking engines, for example, everything's an air pump. Mm-hmm. I don't really care, to a certain degree, what label's on the front of the vehicle, or what model it is. So that'd be my advice to the up and coming.
Yeah. It's the only way to get at it is practice, look at all the known goods you can, and then eventually it'll definitely come through for you there. But cool, man. Well, I appreciate you joining me, and I appreciate the help on fixing the car.
Anytime.
100%.
Yeah, it was I saw your post. I was like, I bet I got something for you. It takes a lot to beat me up, not to toot my own horn or anything, but I've just been through a lot of it. You know what I mean? From a diagnostic standpoint, and I've seen all kinds of wild stuff. So when I get a unique one like this, I actually get excited after, I was like cheering. I was like, yeah, figured it out. Accidentally, but I figured it out. So
it's cool to get past them for sure.
Cool.
Definitely. Awesome. All right. That's going to do it for today's episode. One more big thank you to CJ for joining me on the show and helping me fix the car. Always appreciate that. Also like to thank everybody else out there for listening to the show and all the feedback I've been getting. Always appreciate it. But with that all out of the way, let's get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.